So how does money even come into existence? Because we've learned so much about money now. We've learned what money solves for, what makes the best form of money, the characteristics and properties of money. But how does it come into existence? Historically, did people sit around a fire, look around them at all the different items, and looked at all the properties and had a chart like this and tried to figure out, well, which one of these items is going to be the best form of money? No, never happened that way. Money always emerged naturally. And for money to emerge, well, it had to have these characteristics in a way. But it always happened in a specific direction. So the first and most important characteristic for it to have is being a store of value. So it starts off here. If something isn't viewed as being a good store of value, it wouldn't even have a chance to be considered as money or become money. Because why would you take anything as payment that doesn't store value? You wouldn't even want it. Why would you want something that doesn't hold value? You would never want that. And for something to store value, well, we know that it needs to require work to produce and be durable. So, for example, if you are somebody who accepted a cowrie shell, you would accept a cowrie shell because you know it stores value at that time. Why? Well, because it requires a lot of work to produce more of. Because why would you take a cowrie shell if you can just walk a few feet and find some on the floor? If it's just plentifully available, you wouldn't accept that. You want to make sure that this thing, or you know that to get more of this thing requires a lot of work. And that was the case. If you wanted more cowrie shells, you would have to trek a long distance because you're very far from the coast. Wait until the water becomes shallow, go in the water, and maybe you're going to find a few shells. So it wasn't easy. It required a lot of work to increase the supply, to get a few shells. So in that environment, you viewed cowrie shells as being a good store of value because they required a lot of work to produce, and they're durable. So if somebody had a shell, you are likely to accept it because you view it as a good store of value. Now, as more people accept it and hold it to store value, trade things for it, it then becomes a medium of exchange. Because it just gains this network effect where more people are accepting it, more people have it, and more people start transacting with one another with it. And once enough people start transacting with it, because again, it's portable, it's verifiable, so it has these properties, then people start using it as a unit of account, and they start to account for different things in that unit. So you can see that it always moves in that direction. So money comes into existence always by first being a good store of value, then becoming a medium of exchange, then becoming a unit of account. And this comes from its properties. So the item that has the best properties to be the most saleable money emerges naturally and always in that direction. So let's take a look at a few historical examples of money and how they relate to these properties. So if we look at cowrie shells, we've talked about cowrie shells. The first property we want to look at is requiring work. So cowrie shells required work to produce. It wasn't easy to produce. And you got to think about it. Let's say you're making arrows and you're living either on the west coast of Africa, in Asia or northern Australia, where cowrie shells were used at the time. And you made a specific quantity of arrows, 8 arrows, for example, and it took you the whole day to produce. Now somebody came and told you, hey, I'm going to give you 2 cowrie shells for these arrows. Would you accept that as payment? Well, it depends. It depends how much work is required to produce them. If you could walk 2 hours to get some cowrie shells, then you wouldn't take them because you worked all day. You worked 8 hours to make your arrows. Why would you exchange them for something that would take you only 2 hours to produce? You wouldn't do that because it requires less work for you to get cowrie shells than the item that you're exchanging them for. So you would never want to accept a form of money that doesn't require work to produce. That's plentiful. If you can just walk down the street and there's a bunch of shells on the floor, then why would you accept them as payment? So you always have to view something as requiring as much work as the thing that you're exchanging them for to produce. So in the situation of cowrie shells, if somebody offered you cowrie shells for something, you knew that if you wanted to get cowrie shells yourself, you would have had to walk long distances. You would have had to trek because you're far away from the coast. And then when you got to the coast, you would have to wait until the water is shallow. You would have to go in the water, and maybe you'll only find a few shells, and maybe you won't. So it's really hard to produce more shells. And that's why you would accept them as payment. So it's scarce. They're also durable. So that's an important property as well. They're portable. You can put them in your pocket, walk around with them. If you actually Google cowrie shells, you'll see that they're often even attached into necklaces, right? So it would look like this. And up to today, a lot of, let's Google cowrie shells fashion. The fact that it was used as money still lingers to today. Still today, people wear them as necklaces or have them in parts of their clothing. Even sayings like shell out the money, shell it out, that comes from the time that shells were used as money, because they were used as money for a long time. Shells were money. You wouldn't think that today though, because it's so far off in history. Now, shells were also verifiable. So if you get a shell, you knew it was a real shell. There wasn't the technology to fake shells at the time. Now, they weren't divisible or fungible though. You couldn't cut a shell in half. And one shell isn't exactly the same as another shell. So one thing you'll notice here is that something doesn't need to have all the properties. It just needs to have most of them. And it needs the ones that are the most important that we talked about, for that fill the characteristics of being a good store of value. So these are the most important one, requiring work. It goes from that direction. Now, in this situation, it doesn't need to be divisible or fungible because, well, first of all, it's small enough that you can use it for small items. So you don't really need to divide it. And people, what they would do is they would put them on a string and they would measure the length of the shells they had. For example, if you wanted to buy something, somebody might tell you, I want this length of shells. Not a quantity of shells, but a length. So you would put them on a string, and if it's this length, well, that's the value. So in this situation, it didn't need to have these properties. So really, people use the best money available, but there's never like a perfect money. It's just the best one that you can find is the one that people end up using. Now, in Africa, people use glass beads. And it's the same thing, required a lot of work to produce more of, because the technology to produce glass at the time and in that location only permitted for a specific quantity to be produced, and it had a high cost to produce more of. Durable, portable, verifiable, so same thing as cowrie shells. Not divisible or fungible, but in the same thing as cowrie shell, didn't need to be because they're small enough that you can use them for small items that you didn't need to divide them really. Now, if you look at silver and gold, for example, which these are two items or commodities that have been used as money for a very long time. These two items had even better properties or fulfilled these properties better than cowrie shells and glass beads and other forms of money. And that's why they won over these other forms of money for so long. For example, gold and silver, they required way more work to produce more of. So they're very scarce. So it's hard to extract gold and silver from the ground, and there's only small amounts that are economical to extract at any time. So it's harder to produce gold and silver than glass beads or than cowrie shells. So it's a better form of money solely because of that, because you would want the best money, the one that stores value the best, and this would store value the best because it's harder to produce more of. Now, there's a lot of gold and silver in the ground, but that aren't economical to extract. So, for example, if there's a gold depot somewhere where there's 20 ounces of gold, but it's going to cost you 25 ounces to extract, then you're not going to extract them. If you have to pay people and hire people and get equipment to go extract that gold, and it's going to cost you more than there is, you're not going to extract them. So there's only a little bit that's viable to extract every year. So it makes for good money because it requires a lot of work to extract more of. It's also very durable. So it doesn't corrode. It maintains its quality over time. Better than any of these things. Like you can leave gold and silver forever. It's still going to be the same thing. It's divisible, so you can divide them in smaller units. So you can see that they fulfill the properties better. It's portable. very small amounts are worth a lot. So it's very easy to transport large values. But at the same time, we said it's divisible. So even if you want a small amount, you just cut it into smaller pieces. It's fungible. So each unit is consistent, can be minted into coins of consistent purity and weight. So gold is gold, and you can mint the gold into coins. So a goldsmith can take a piece of gold, mint it, put their name on it, and says this gold is 31 grams of gold, and it's 22 carats of purity. So it becomes completely fungible that way. And it's verifiable. You can test the purity and weight or trust the mint stamp. So you can take a piece of gold and weigh it and check how pure it is. Or if it's minted by a goldsmith or even by a government that put their name on it and says, this is 31 grams, 99 point whatever percentage purity, then you would trust that. So you can verify it by trusting it or by testing it yourself. And it's fungible because if you have them minted, they're the same value. So gold and silver actually fulfilled these properties of money the best. But you also realize that often something doesn't fulfill all the properties. It's just the best thing that people have is what they're going to use. Money doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be the best that's available. But one thing you might have realized out of these properties, that the most important one is that it requires work to produce. So we can look at more recent examples of situations where money emerges in an economy. For example, in prison. Wherever people are, wherever people want to transact, they want to use something as money for the reasons that we've talked about up until now. So in prisons, one form of currency is cigarettes. So people use cigarettes to transact. Why? Well, because it fulfills a lot of these properties. First, it requires a lot of work to produce. Now, smuggling in cigarettes in prison is probably not easy. It requires work. So it has value. Now, is it really durable? Medium, not too bad. Portable, yeah. Verifiable, I guess. Not really divisible. Probably fungible. Maybe there's different brands that have different values. But the most important is requiring work. And again, here you'll see that wherever there's an economy, wherever people want to trade, they're going to need to use something as money, and they're going to use the best thing that's available to them. Now, would they prefer to use gold? Sure, because gold fulfills these properties better, but they don't have access to gold. So they'll just use the next best thing that's available for them. Nobody forces them to use this. It emerges naturally. In the same way that shells emerge naturally, or glass beads, or gold. Nobody forced anybody to use them. There was no central shell bank that forced its usage. People chose to use it. People chose to use it because it has these properties. Now in prison, they've also used ramen noodles. So these are two types of forms of money that you can find in prison. And again, for these specific reasons, requires work. These are okay durable, I guess. Okay portable, verifiable, not really divisible. Probably maybe different flavors have different values, but you catch what I'm saying, right? Any economy, anywhere where people want to transact, a form of money will emerge. And you can read a lot of articles about prison economies. It's very interesting. But yeah, that's it. As humans, we need money, and we're always going to choose the best form of money that's available to us wherever we are.